Alrighty, so week 6 in CIT93 JavaScript. Seems like most of you are doing well in this course, which I'm excited. I will remind you that in simple syllabus, there is a list for the times of tutors available. There's my office hours. Please reach out for help. The sooner, the better. And remember, I do look at your code and the code alongs, and yeah, for sure in the discussions to make sure it works. That's going to become a bigger part of the grade for those things. But let's talk about where we're at, right? So I'll look in here in a minute because I have a couple things we need to do. But we're going to be covering forms, rendering output to the DOM. So where we've been just calling start and passing it parameters, right? Arguments, parameters, passing it into the start function, which calls the other function, calculates a total, then we call the display. So we're going to move from that to actually creating forms, which is what almost everyone does when they're interacting with the web. So this is a really fun thing to start at this point, and I really feel like it's fundamental to understand functions, arrays, and objects, at least at a certain level before we start this, because it'll help inform some of the things we learn here. And then rendering it to the DOM. So not only do we get the user input, we also render that input to the DOM. So what we're going to end up doing here is accepting the user input for their values for the carbon footprint, saving that so submissions of the form submission into the array and make it an array of objects, and then outputting that to the DOM. So we're beginning really something we call crud, create. Like if you haven't heard this term, a crud app, right? So a crud app, probably a better one I could have got. Here's a pretty good image right here. So we're going to create data. So this is what the form submission will do. And then we'll read the data, and this is what our display is doing now, but we'll upgrade this. And then over this next couple of weeks, we'll learn how to delete and update the data that the user has given us. So create, read, update, and delete. CRUD is the acronym that is for a very common thing we do both in apps and in database. So for those taking my database class, you will hear this term again. So then for your discussion, you're going to add first name and last name. So just to roll forward a little bit. So in week 7, we learned tabular data, learn how to actually render a tab and basically a table data, coding the body and doing modules. So what will happen here on week 7 is we're going to get to the point now where we have so much code, it's time we start organizing it. So we'll have that. And then conditional rendering, right? And then here you can see we're doing the U part of CRUD. But I just want you to know we're really beginning that CRUD process. Well, we already started it, but we're formalizing it this week. And then as we roll forward into week 9, it really starts to change. And what we do here is we start creating a decision app. Now you will hear me talk more about that as we get into week 9, but just know this. Everything that we've learned up until this point for the carbon footprint, you're going to basically take that design pattern, because this is what it is, and implement an app for decision-making process. And again, this will be something you'll choose your own decision-making process, but the code itself will not be anything we haven't covered before. It'll just be your implementation of that. And then in week 10, I'm actually thinking of moving the window for the code review, because as I have maybe said, and I'm sorry, in this case it's technical interview, I'll change that wording to where you can start signing up here in week 10. And I'm doing that because I'm doing that also for my database class. So, but at this point in week 9, we really start to change, because instead of having 2 code alongs, we only have 1, and then 1 code discussion, and then we have a step. So what will happen is each week you'll do another step in creating that app, and that really goes back to what we learned in the beginning, which so we retrace basically what you've done in this decision app. But with the carbon footprint, we continue forward and add more functionality that you won't probably add to your decision app. Actually, you won't, because this will be from the beginning. So if that sounds confusing, you could ask me, or just know that kind of where we're heading. And then I think I will next week. I'll look at it. This is actually new for this fall 2024 semester. But for this one, for the attendance, right? I wanted to I looked at the video I had from last semester. I'm updating it this one, but some students who are not, there are some students in here not taking my web development classes. So other students are learning things like Bootstrap and other HTML. And so in this class, I don't cover a lot of that because honestly, some students who are just coming in with other majors in mind, I probably could. I just try not to, I already throw quite a bit in this class, so that's maybe why. So if you're taking some of my other web development classes, you might wonder, why aren't we using Bootstrap or something? You totally could, but I don't do it in this class because it adds a layer of complexity that students who haven't had those classes, it makes it a bit more challenging. So the other thing is when you're doing your coding, right, use code formatting because what you really want is to really make sure your code is readable, because I read your code, okay? And remember, when you're doing code challenges, if you don't get the right code before you watch the solution, tell me what you did. That helps me understand how much effort you do there. And then I already talked about that we're going to use forms and render HTML this week. So what I thought I would offer, which by the way, before I go into this, you do, and this is important, like before in week 5, I actually just coded up the solution. Well, I did more than just coding the solution. I also did some additional coding. So you definitely want to do that. But what I wanted to give you was something I talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is an app I'm helping create for integrating generative AI, in this case ChatGPT or OpenAI API, into a Canvas assignment. So I want to give you an opportunity to play around with this as a good practice for your technical interview. I've given you some prompts before, and this is just a way for me to see how well you're tracking some of the concepts. I'm not going to grade this, but I will say you want to submit this assignment, and I'll show you right now what I mean by that. Okay, so make sure you do this part. Make sure you do submit this assignment. So when you come in here, it's called the ICA. There's different, I've been actually giving it different names, which is probably not helping the branding part of this, but this is a Canvas item, and then we have these steps. We have 3 steps that you're going to complete. We have these chat bubbles, and you'll see how this all works. So what you'll do here is you'll have 3 buttons you'll need to work through. One is to get started, one's to continuing learning, and one is a code challenge. And actually all along the way there's code challenges, which are good. And the reason I didn't put this open sooner was we just implemented the ability to write multiple lines of code. So I'll show you that. So when you come in here, what you'll need to do is give it your student ID. Make sure you put that leading 0 in there. And then when you do that, what happens here is it gives a disclaimer about what you're about to do gets saved, because what we want you to know is that we're not sending your personal information to OpenAI, but we are using it to submit the assignment into Canvas. Again, there's a lot that went into building this app. I'd love to chat about it. If you want to know more detail, it's built on several platforms, but specifically on Next.js, which is a React extension. Okay, so now once you get here, now we're actually off of Canvas. Now we're into, and in this case it's the assignment. So here's your 3 buttons that correspond here. When you click the button, this is the prompt that gets sent to the generative AI, OpenAI. So if we click here, then, right, explain. So do your best, right? So do your best to explain, right, the for and the while. We didn't really cover the while. We did a little bit, right? So remember, this is not This is really just to see how well you're translating some of these concepts. And in here I just said loops. So I could have been more specific in my prompt to say what kind of loops we've covered, because we haven't covered the while, but it doesn't hurt to go play with the while loop. It's a good idea. So in here, right, if you were coding, right, so if I was to say for, so I would say array. Now in this case, dot for each, right? Maybe that's the one I want to each, right? Function. So let's say I had a line here, object, right? So I don't want to do this. Now if I wanted to do a new line, I would do shift, hold down shift, hit enter. And that would allow me to do multiple line input. Otherwise, this gets really long to do this coding here. So once you get all the coding that you want done, right, in order for the system, because it's going to check it, right? So it's going to say, let's start. You can explain. Oh, in this case, it's asking explain. I was actually coding up the example. You can provide an example of how you might use one or the other. So those are good things. But in general, often what you're doing is coding here. So then when you'd hit submit, yeah, so this is good. So what you're going to do is interact, right? So that's the idea of learning. So it's going to evaluate this and go, hey, how does this answer this question, right? So the idea is you want to work through this, and then you'll continue learning, right? Can you explain DOM elements, right? Because the other thing I did on the elements was that we're creating DOM elements with create element, right? So this is asking you specifically about that concept. So then you would answer that. And then the last thing, if you didn't get a code challenge, which I've done this a couple times, and that's the other thing, is every time you do this, you get a bit different, because there's a certain amount, I don't know if randomness is it, but also just a certain amount of different outcomes. So when I do a code challenge, then it's going to say, yeah, let's do a function, an array of objects, displays it on, oh, this is a fun one, right? So then you attempt this one again, remembering that multi-line submission. Then when you hit enter, it should give you feedback on the code you wrote. And then once you're done, you can submit the assignment. Now what I'm going to do is it helps me kind of, gives me a view into how well you're translating some of these ideas. Before, when I was giving you prompts, right, in last week, I think it was, or maybe it was the week before, this is different but similar in the fact that you can interact, see how well you've done, submit it to me. So this becomes then an assignment. And we're rolling this out. For those of you taking my database class, you're seeing a lot more of this. And I'm figuring out now that we have this editability, this multi-line input, is how I'd use it in a course like this. Because, anyway, give that a try, right? Make sure you do the coding here, because it is an additional one. Give me any feedback on the good practice or anything else I've talked about, and make sure you have that commit and ready to go. Oh, and by the way, make sure it's happened a couple times. Make sure you're using your private repo for this work. Once we move from the end of the week discussion into our code alongs, you'll copy that code over. And if you're working on code spaces, you might just have to go out to GitHub and just open the file and copy it, and then go over to your other code space and do it there. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out. Okay, I'll talk to you later.